Please subscribe. It helps a lot.
Will gripped the wheel of his 10-year-old silver Trans Am as the road narrowed into a ribbon of cracked asphalt. The tops were removed, letting in the warm air of late September 1989. The car's engine hummed steadily, its sound filling the spaces where words didn't reach. The road cut past stretches of maple and birch, their leaves starting to turn. Shadows shifted with each bend, giving the ride a rhythm of light and dark. Tim sat in the passenger seat, restless, flicking through a small stack of cassette tapes. He lifted one, made a face, and shoved it back into the glove box before pulling another. His movements were fast, his attention hopping from the music to the cigarette pack he kept flipping in his hands. He filled silence with noise, humming, tapping his foot, muttering half-thoughts. Russell sat in the back seat, quiet, his gaze fixed on the trees. His shoulders pressed into the seat as though he wanted to sink inside it. He hadn't spoken in half an hour, not since they left the last gas station. Will caught his reflection in the rearview mirror more than once. The boy's face stayed still, unreadable, but his eyes followed the woods like they held a secret he was unwilling to share. Something about the silence drew Will in. The car hit a stretch of road where Mill Brook curved alongside. The water flashed silver through the trees, then vanished behind brush. Will eased the car into the bend, his knuckles tightening on the wheel. "You're driving like it's Sunday morning," Tim said, breaking the quiet. He leaned back, cigarette now balanced between his fingers, though he hadn't lit it. Will gave him a quick glance. "It's not a race." "Tell that to this thing," Tim muttered, tapping the dash. "Car wants to run." Will caught Russell's reflection again in the rear view. This time their eyes met for the briefest moment. It felt like Russell was searching for something in him, a sign maybe, or an answer. Then the boy's gaze slid back to the trees, the moment broken. The afternoon sun lowered behind a line of hills, the light sharpening into gold that cut across the windshield. Will reached to pull down the visor, but before he could, a flash of red and blue split across the rearview mirror. Tim straightened in his seat. "Well, hell." He shoved the cigarette back into the pack, tossing it onto the dash. Will eased his foot off the gas, pulling the Pontiac toward the gravel shoulder. The lights closed in. Gravel crunched under the tires as the car slowed to a stop. Will placed both hands on the wheel, pulse pushing at his throat. Russell stayed still in the back seat, his eyes shifting to the mirror. His expression didn't change, but something sharp flickered across it, gone before Will could pin it down. Tim craned his neck to watch the patrol car settle behind them. Through the mirror, Will saw the door of the cruiser swing open. A man stepped out, heavy-set, his frame filling the uniform with an authority that looked more personal than official. His boots crunched on gravel as he walked toward them. The man stopped at the driver's side window. His shadow cut across Will's lap as he leaned forward, one hand on the roof of the car. The badge caught the light. Sheriff Larry Stott. His face held a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon," the sheriff said. His voice was calm, too calm, stretched thin. "License and registration." Will nodded once, keeping his movements slow. He reached for the glove box, pulled out the papers, and handed them over. The sheriff didn't glance at them right away. Instead, he studied Will's face, his smile holding. "Where you boys headed?" "Through town," Will said. His voice sounded steady, though his chest tightened. Tim leaned forward, restless. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" "We weren't speeding." Stott's gaze shifted to Tim. The smile slipped. "I'll ask the questions." His tone sharpened, losing its softness. He straightened, glancing back at the cruiser, then down the road. His hand tapped against the roof once before he crouched slightly, closer to Will's window again. "Step out of the car." Will's fingers tightened on the wheel. He felt Tim turn to him, the question hanging in the air. Russell remained quiet, eyes trained on the trees outside his window. The sheriff's hand dropped to the butt of the pistol at his hip. The smile returned, stretched thin again. "Now," he said. Will opened the door and stepped onto the gravel. The air outside felt cooler than inside the car, though the sun still hung above the trees. The sheriff motioned him toward the front of the Pontiac. Gravel crunched under his boots. From the corner of his eye, Will saw Tim tense, one hand braced against the dashboard. He heard Russell shift in the back seat, though the boy stayed quiet. The sheriff's voice carried behind him, calm and cold. "Let's have a little talk." Will kept his face forward. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, the sound filling the silence that followed. The gravel pressed into Will's shoes as he stood in front of the Pontiac. The hood radiated heat from the drive, carrying the smell of warm metal. Sheriff Stant circled him slowly, his presence heavy and deliberate. The man's breath carried tobacco and coffee, his words quiet but sharp. "Young man," he said, "you know why I stopped you?" "No," Will answered. Stant studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't like lies." He leaned in closer. "You were drifting. Couldn't hold steady on the road. Maybe you've been drinking." Will's throat tightened, but he forced his voice calm. "I haven't been drinking." The sheriff tilted his head, lips curling. "We'll see about that." From the car, Tim called out, his tone tight with anger. "He's fine, Sheriff." "We weren't breaking any laws." Stant turned his head, his jaw flexing. "Stay quiet," he barked. His voice cracked the air like a whip. Tim didn't back down. "You can't cuff him for nothing." The sheriff moved fast. He spun toward the passenger side, yanked open the door, and dragged Tim out by the arm. Tim stumbled on the gravel but kept his voice strong. "You don't have cause," he shouted, though the sound shook more than he wanted it to. Stant forced Tim against the car and snapped cold steel around his wrists. The cuffs bit down, the click echoing in the still air. Will stepped forward, anger stirring in his chest. "There's no reason for this." Stant grabbed Will's arm and twisted it behind his back with practiced force. The cuffs locked tight, cutting into his skin. He shoved Will forward until he was pressed against the hot metal of the hood. The smell of oil and dust filled his nose. "You think you know the law?" Stant said close to his ear. "You don't know anything." Tim strained against the cuffs, his voice rising. "This isn't legal." "Shut your mouth," Stant snapped. His words carried venom, his face dark with rage. From the back seat, Russell's silence broke. The door creaked open, his sneakers hit gravel, and then he bolted into the trees. His body moved fast, a flash of dark clothing swallowed by brush. Stant cursed, shoving Will harder against the hood. "Damn kid," he growled. He yanked Will upright, then jerked Tim by the arm, forcing both of them toward his cruiser. "Where are you taking us?" Tim demanded, his voice cut through the air. Stant didn't answer. His hand gripped Will's arm with bruising strength as he shoved him into the back seat. Tim landed beside him. The doors slammed shut, the locks clicking down. Through the window, Will caught a glimpse of the Pontiac abandoned on the shoulder, sunlight glinting off its silver paint. The sheriff slid into the driver's seat, his broad back filling the space. His radio crackled faintly, but he didn't reach for it. He drove in silence, his jaw tight, his knuckles pale on the wheel. Tim twisted against the cuffs, his breath coming fast. "This isn't right. He's not even taking us to the station." Will said nothing. His pulse pounded, but his face stayed calm. His eyes fixed on the passing trees, shadows slicing through the glass. The road wound deeper into the woods. The sun slipped lower, the light bleeding into orange. The cruiser rattled over potholes, each jolt driving the cuffs deeper into Will's skin. Tim tried again, his voice cracking. "You can't do this. People will notice." Stant laughed low, a sound with no warmth. "People don't notice a damn thing out here." Silence filled the car after that. The tires hummed over asphalt, the woods closing in thicker with each mile. Will leaned back against the seat, his eyes sliding toward Tim. Their shoulders touched, both of them pressed into the narrow space. Tim's face burned with anger, but his eyes carried fear he couldn't hide. The cruiser slowed. Gravel crunched again as Stant pulled off the road. Will lifted his head enough to see a long drive leading to a farmhouse set back from the trees. White paint peeled from the side, the porch sagged in the middle, and a faint curl of smoke rose from a tin ashtray by the steps. Stant parked the car, cut the engine, and turned in his seat. His eyes lingered on them, heavy and unblinking. "Out," he said. He opened the door and yanked Will first, dragging him onto the drive. The air here smelled different, earthy, damp, with a faint tang of manure from somewhere nearby. Tim followed, his wrists bound, his steps uneven as the sheriff shoved him forward. The farmhouse loomed silent, its windows dark though the sun still lit the sky. The boards creaked under their weight as they climbed the steps. On the porch, a man waited. He wore a dark jacket over a pressed shirt, a Bible resting in one hand. His other hand held a cigarette, the smoke curling lazily upward. His hair was combed neat, his posture easy, his smile too wide. "Evening, boys," the man said, his voice smooth as silk. "Councilman Carl Eugene." Will recognized the name, though not the face. His father had mentioned him once, praising his speeches at church meetings. Carl stepped closer, the smoke trailing from his cigarette. His eyes scanned Will and Tim, pausing on their bound wrists. His smile never faltered. "I see you've brought guests." Staunt grunted. "They're trouble." Carl's gaze lingered on Will, then shifted to Tim. His smile deepened. Carl opened the door to the farmhouse, the hinges groaning. He gestured inside with the hand holding the Bible, smoke from his cigarette curling around the holy book. "Come along," he said softly. "We'll talk in the barn." Will and Tim were pushed forward. The floorboards moaned under their weight as the door shut behind them. The world outside fell silent. The barn door groaned open as Carl guided them across the yard. The smell of hay mixed with the sour stench of animals long gone. Dust floated in the air, catching the orange light spilling through warped slats. Will's boots scraped across the packed dirt as the sheriff forced him forward, the cuffs biting into his wrists. Carl led the way, his Bible tucked under one arm, cigarette dangling from his lips. His calm steps carried weight, like a preacher pacing before a sermon. When they reached the center of the barn, he turned and looked at them as if studying livestock brought in for auction. "The usual spot," he said, pointing to two wooden posts. The sheriff shoved Will toward one and dragged Tim toward the other. Rough rope wrapped around their arms and chests, the fibers cut into skin. The sheriff pulled each knot tight enough that the blood in Will's fingers slowed. Carl exhaled smoke, his voice soft. "Good work." The sheriff's face shone with sweat, though the evening air had cooled. "The quiet one's in the trees." "I'll find him." Carl's eyes flicked to Will, then to Tim. "Leave them to me for now." The sheriff gave a stiff nod and strode out of the barn, his boots fading toward the woods. Silence filled the space until Carl tapped his cigarette on the edge of a nearby barrel. Ash fell to the dirt. He looked at them with a faint smile, the glow of the cigarette warming his face in the dim light. "You two look nervous," he said. His voice carried the smooth rhythm of a practiced speaker. "No reason for that. Fear is wasted on good men." Tim tugged at the ropes, his voice sharp. "You call this good?" Carl tilted his head unimpressed. "You think you know where you are? You don't. You think the world sees you. It doesn't." Will kept his eyes steady on Carl, refusing to let him see fear. The councilman's gaze lingered on him longer than it did on Tim. Something in that look made Will's stomach knot. Carl quoted a line from Scripture, his tone rising as if from a pulpit. "The wage of sin is death." His lips curled slightly, as though savoring the words. Tim spat on the ground. "You hide behind that book while you kill kids. You're nothing but a coward." Carl's smile faltered, replaced by a flat expression that revealed more truth than he likely intended. He took one slow step forward, then another, until he stood close enough for Will to smell the smoke on his breath. "You speak with anger because you don't understand order," Carl said. "Boys like you think rules don't apply, but they do. Always. And we're going to do a lot more than just kill you. By sunrise, you'll be begging for the end, except that'll just be the beginning." Tim thrashed against the ropes, his voice breaking. "People will find out." "Someone will notice." Carl's eyes shifted back to Will. "No one will notice. That's the beauty of it. You'll just disappear. No one will ever know." The barn's silence pressed in. Somewhere outside, a night bird called, its sound swallowed by the trees. Carl turned away, walked to a table against the wall, and set down his Bible. He stubbed his cigarette out on the wood, leaving a black mark beside the holy text. You'd be surprised how often silence follows us. Families forget. Towns move on. Nobody listens. Will's chest rose and fell, each breath deliberate. His wrists burned from the ropes, but his focus stayed fixed on Carl's movements. He said nothing, holding the silence like a shield. Tim broke it again, his voice raw. How many? Carl looked over his shoulder, a faint smile returning. Enough. The barn door rattled open a crack as the wind shifted. No footsteps followed. The sheriff was still outside, somewhere in the woods. Carl lit another cigarette and leaned against the table, eyes watching them as if he had all night. He spoke in a calm tone that cut sharper than any raised voice. The sheriff is thorough. He'll bring your friend back. Then we'll talk about what happens next. Will stayed quiet, though his mind raced. Each word from Carl painted a darker picture. Each pause weighed heavy. His eyes drifted to Tim, who met his gaze with fury and fear tangled together. Minutes stretched. Then the silence broke. A scream ripped through the air outside. It carried deep pain, cut short by a gunshot that echoed across the yard. The barn walls seemed to shake with the sound. Carl froze. The cigarette trembled between his fingers. For the first time, his calm cracked. His eyes darted to the door, then back to Will and Tim. Neither boy spoke. The barn filled with the smell of smoke and the taste of fear. Carl muttered a line of scripture, but his voice shook now. He dropped the cigarette, the ember flaring against the dirt before it died. The woods outside went silent. No footsteps, no voices. Only the echo of what had already happened. Will felt his pulse rise, the ropes digging deeper into his skin. His silence held steady, but inside his chest the weight grew heavier. He fixed his gaze on the barn door, waiting. Carl's eyes stayed locked on that same door. For all his practiced speeches, for all the power he carried in town, he now looked like a man uncertain of what waited in the dark. The barn grew colder with the night air leaking through its broken slats. Time passed, stretched thin, each second louder than the last. Carl's eyes never left the barn door. His cigarette had burned down to the filter between his fingers, but he didn't notice until the heat reached his skin. He flinched, swore under his breath, and crushed it beneath his heel. The act didn't restore his calm. The silence outside weighed heavier than the smoke now clinging to the rafters. Will kept his focus steady. The ropes cut into his wrists, but his mind didn't drift to the pain. His eyes stayed on Carl, watching the twitch in the man's jaw, the crack in his certainty. Tim broke the silence first. What happened out there? His voice was raw, but sharp. Carl didn't answer. His lips moved around scripture, words half-whispered like a prayer. His gaze darted between the door and the boys tied to the posts. He looked like he wanted to pace but couldn't bring himself to move far from the table where his Bible rested. Minutes dragged. The air grew colder. Will's breathing slowed, his thoughts turning over in silence. He could feel the moment shifting, though Carl tried to cling to control. The door creaked. Carl spun, his hand going instinctively to the pistol at his side. His shoulders stiffened as the door pushed inward. Russell stepped through. His face was set, his eyes steady, a tranquilizer gun raised in both hands. His clothes were streaked with dirt, his hair plastered damp against his forehead. He didn't speak. He aimed, pulled the trigger, and the dart sank into Carl's chest. The councilman gasped, dropping to his knees. His cigarette pack slipped from his pocket, scattering across the dirt. He clawed at the dart, his breath breaking into shallow bursts. His Bible slid from the table, landing beside him, its pages bending in the dust. Will felt his chest tighten as relief cut through the haze of fear. Tim let out a sharp breath, stunned, his eyes wide on Russell. Carl tried to speak, his mouth forming words that didn't come. His arms trembled as he reached out, then collapsed onto his side. His body twitched once, then stilled. Russell lowered the gun. His face remained calm, though his hands shook faintly. He walked toward them, his steps steady despite the tremor. He set the gun down on the table, pulled a knife from his belt, and began cutting at the ropes. Will watched him close the distance, the blade flashing in the low light. The rope loosened across his chest, then fell to the dirt. Blood rushed back into his arms, the pins and needles biting hard. Russell moved to Tim next. The knife sliced through the coarse rope, freeing him with quick movements. Tim pulled at his wrists, shaking them out, his breathing uneven. "You're okay," Tim whispered, staring at Russell as if seeing him for the first time. Russell nodded once, his expression unreadable. His eyes flicked to Will. For the first time, their gazes locked without breaking. Will felt something sharp move inside him, not fear, but recognition, a thread tying them together in the dim barn. "He got a shot off before I landed a dart in his neck." Barely missed me. Will wanted to speak, but no words came. His chest filled with too much all at once. Russell stepped back, tucking the knife into his belt again. He reached for the tranquilizer gun, his grip steady now. He turned toward the door, his shoulders squared. "Wait," Will said softly. His voice cracked through the quiet. Russell looked back at him. For a moment, the barn held still. The dust hung in the air, the ropes lay broken on the floor, and Carl Eugene's body twitched faintly as the drug coursed through him. Will stepped closer, his wrists raw, his body aching. He stopped short, though, keeping a space between them. The weight of everything pressed down, but the sight of Russell standing there alive, unshaken, filled him with something stronger than fear. Tim shifted beside them, his voice hard. "What now?" Russell's reply was cold and clear. "We tie him up, then wait for him to wake up." Carl stirred on the dirt floor, his breath catching in shallow bursts. His eyes fluttered open, then widened when they locked on Russell. A tremor passed through his body. He tried to push himself up, but the drug left his limbs weak. His voice cracked, no longer smooth or rehearsed. "No," he whispered. His eyes filled with recognition, his face drained of color. I left you in the creek." Russell's stance didn't waver. His grip on the tranquilizer gun stayed firm. His voice came steady, flat. "You thought you did." Carl's lips moved without sound at first. Then his words tumbled out, frantic. "You weren't breathing." "I checked. I dragged you out there myself. I left you for the water." Tim stepped forward, his fists clenched. "And you smiled while you did it, didn't you? You and your friend with the badge. You smiled because you thought nobody would know." Carl looked toward the barn door as if the sheriff might walk in and save him, but the silence outside pressed heavier with each second. "You don't understand," Carl said, his voice rising. "It wasn't what you think." Will's voice cut in, low but sharp. "It's exactly what we think." Carl's chest heaved as he shook his head. He pushed against the floor, trying to sit upright. His Bible still lay beside him, bent open, its pages smeared with dirt. His fingers twitched toward it, then froze when Russell lifted the gun an inch higher. Tim's anger spilled out, years of silence breaking loose. "My brother never came home. He walked this same road. He trusted this town. He trusted men like you. They said he ran away. You knew he didn't. You made him disappear." Carl's mouth opened, but nothing came. His eyes darted, searching for an argument, but none arrived. Will stepped closer, his wrists raw from the rope burns. His voice shook, but held firm. "I knew another boy. He wasn't from here, but he vanished the same way. I heard your name whispered, but nobody listened. People said I was chasing shadows. You were the shadow." Carl swallowed hard, his breath catching. "You don't know the weight of this place. Order has to be kept. Young men with loose tongues, with wild lives, they bring shame. We kept the town clean." Safe. Russell's eyes narrowed. His words came cold, each syllable sharp. "You didn't keep it safe. You killed boys who trusted you." Carl's mask broke. He crawled forward on his knees, his hands pressed together as if in prayer. "Mercy. You have to show mercy." Tim barked a laugh, bitter and hollow. "Mercy? Where was mercy when you held my brother down? Where was mercy when you left Russell in that creek?" Carl's body shook. His lips moved around scripture, fragments spilling out, but the words no longer carried power. Will felt the weight of it in his chest, heavy and suffocating. The years of silence, The lies told by those in power, the empty prayers that followed missing boys. He looked at Russell, whose face stayed calm, but whose hands trembled faintly on the gun. Their eyes met. In that moment, Will saw more than anger in him. He saw a will to finish what began long before tonight. The barn door creaked. The sheriff's body was dragged inside by Russell's hand, limp, lifeless. His face sagged, his skin pale, his service pistol gone. Russell dropped him near Carl without ceremony. Carl let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more a choked gasp. His authority crumbled completely then. He reached for the Bible again, clutching it tight to his chest. His words spilled out fast, scripture tangled with begging. Tim looked at Will. His voice cracked but carried force. Nobody believed us. Nobody cared. We came here for this. Will stepped closer to Russell. Their shoulders nearly touched. The barn air pressed heavy, the dirt floor cold under his boots. He spoke softly, so only Russell could hear. We end it now. Russell's jaw tightened. He nodded once. The sheriff's lifeless eyes stared up from the floor. Carl's body shook as he clung to his Bible. His voice rose in a plea that mixed fear with scripture. But no one listened. Tim's face twisted with rage, his fists trembling. For my brother, he said, his voice breaking. Russell raised the gun. Carl's begging turned to sobs. He tried to crawl backward, but his body gave out. Will looked away for a moment, his throat tight. The sound that followed was quick. Carl collapsed beside the sheriff, the Bible slipping from his hands. The barn fell still again. Silence stretched long. Tim's shoulders shook, his breathing ragged. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, his eyes red but unyielding. It's done, he said. The barn smelled of smoke and dirt, the air thick from the struggle that had ended there. Carl and the sheriff lay side by side, their authority stripped, their silence final. Will stood near Russell, the weight of the night pressing into his bones. He kept his eyes on the floor, though the images in his mind would not let him rest. Tim moved first. He pulled the rope from the ground, wrapping it into a coil with shaking hands. His face carried no triumph, only exhaustion. We need to clear it, he said. His voice was hoarse, raw from anger and grief. Will nodded, though his throat burned too much to answer. The three of them worked quickly. They dragged the bodies into the far corner, out of sight from the barn door. The effort left sweat streaked across Will's face, his wrists aching from rope burns. The sound of Carl's Bible sliding across the dirt as they moved him stayed with him more than the weight of the body itself. Tim gathered the rest of the rope and doused it in fuel from a rusted can near the wall. Russell lit a match and let it fall, the flames eating their way across the pile. The fire took quickly, climbing the wooden beams. The barn glowed with a cruel light, shadows twisting across their faces. They stepped back into the night, leaving the blaze behind. The air outside felt sharp against Will's skin, cooler now that the sun had sunk fully below the hills. Smoke lifted into the sky, carrying the last traces of what had happened inside. Will slid into the driver's seat, the leather still warm from the day. Tim climbed into the passenger side without a word. Russell lowered himself into the back seat, his eyes fixed on the mirror, watching the smoke rise over the treetops. The drive was silent. The tires hummed over the broken road, each mile carrying them further from the farmhouse. The glow of the fire faded behind them, swallowed by trees. Will kept his eyes forward, his hands steady on the wheel, though inside his chest his heart beat like it wanted to break free. By the time they reached the edge of Plainfield, the night was quiet again. The houses sat dark, curtains drawn, porches empty. The town slept, unaware that two of its pillars lay erased from its future. They parked the Pontiac miles away in a gravel pull-off where no one would think to look. Tim turned to them, his voice steady now, though his eyes shone. This doesn't end here. We carry it. That's the cost. He looked at Will, then at Russell, his tone softening. My brother can rest now. That's enough for me. He stepped out of the car and walked into the night, his figure fading along the narrow road. Neither Will nor Russell called after him. Silence filled the car again. Will turned the key, shutting off the engine. The world grew still except for the faint rush of Millbrook nearby. The creek's water caught the moonlight as it moved through the trees, its sound soft but steady. Russell leaned forward, his arms resting on the back of Will's seat. His voice was quiet, careful. "I shouldn't be here. After last year, I thought it was over. I thought I was gone. But tonight," he paused, his breath catching. "Tonight I saw something worth staying for." Will's throat tightened. He turned slightly, meeting Russell's eyes in the mirror. The reflection carried more than words ever could: survival, fear, and something fragile that had grown through it. He reached back, his hand brushing against Russell's. The touch was small, almost nothing, yet it filled the space between them with more weight than all the silence of the night. Russell's hand lingered against his. His voice dropped lower. "You gave me a reason to keep breathing. When we drove out here, I wasn't sure I could face it. You made me sure." Will swallowed, his voice rough. "I want you to stay." Neither spoke after that. They sat in the stillness, the creek moving beside them, the night holding them in its quiet grip. Will turned then, leaning across the seat. Russell met him halfway. Their lips touched, not rushed, not careless, but with the weight of everything behind it. Fear, pain, and the small spark of something alive pressed into that kiss. When they pulled back, Russell rested his forehead against Will's shoulder, his voice soft enough that only Will heard. "We'll carry it together." The words sank deep, anchoring something inside Will that had felt unsteady since the moment the patrol lights flashed behind them. The night stretched on. No headlights cut through the dark road. No footsteps came from the town. The secret lay sealed between them, smoke rising unseen over the trees. Plainfield would wake to headlines in the morning. The deaths would be called a mystery, prayers would be offered, rumors would spread, but no truth would surface. Only two young men by the creek knew. Only they carried the memory of rope, fire, and silence. Only they carried the kiss that bound them to a future neither could name, but both refused to let go. Will closed his eyes for a moment, the sound of the creek steady, Russell's hand still resting against his. The world outside would never know, but inside that car, something unbroken remained.
Please make sure you are subscribed and be one of the strange.